Hey Richard, how's it going?
Good. How are you, Pete?
You hanging in there, man? I know that you kind of were a little under the weather.
Uh, I got
Getting
a mug of hot water here, trying to keep my voice intact. So we'll see what we can
that
do.
that sounds absolutely delicious. Wonderful. Well, hey everyone, thank you for joining us on this second day of our Revenue Excellence Summit here for Modern Sales Pros. I'm super pumped to have Richard here today. Richard is the founder of Fathom, AI call recording solution, and we're going to be talking about the impact of AI on the sales team now and in the future, specifically with a lens towards call recording and what that can actually do in the future. So I'm really excited because obviously Richard thinks a lot about this stuff. A little bit more on Richard here in a second. My name's Pete Kazanji. For those who don't know me, I'm one of the founders of Atrium. Atrium makes sales performance management software that helps organizations measure, manage, and improve the performance of their sales teams. I'm also one of the founders of Modern Sales Pros. Um, got into sales and sales excellence about 10 years ago or so when I became when I started a recruiting software company called TalentBin and was our first seller. So business generalist founder, first seller, first sales manager, first sales leader. And then that's kind of where I went from, like being a business generalist founder to understanding the, operationally excellent modern sales. Wrote a book associated with that called Founding Sales as well. So I think a little bit about sales. So that's a little bit on me. And then Richard, maybe you can kind of give folks a little bit of a context for you. You're a little bit about your background, how you came to starting Fathom.
Yeah. So my background is I'm originally an engineer turned product designer, and I actually spent a lot of the last 15 years building a company called User Voice, where I actually at one point there was the sales leader, which so I have tried
Nice.
my hand at it. Engineer turned sales leader is not recommended by me, but it was very enlightening, and honestly, it laid a lot of the foundation for starting Fathom, where going back in 2020, we kind of had this theory that we thought AI was going to get really good. We thought transcription was going to get a lot more affordable, and we thought we could be the first people to kind of do a free AI call recorder and give that away for folks and really build this cool kind of like bottom up product. And 4 years later, we're the highest rated AI note taker on G2 and have won a bunch of different awards, fastest growing app on HubSpot, et cetera, et cetera. And so, yeah, it's been a fun ride so far.
That's awesome. I mean, super crazy. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of lessons here, like for the entrepreneurs in the audience. I think there's a lot of lessons there for the sales leaders in the audience. The sales leaders, the operations, and the sales manager. There's also going to be some lessons around like how to add leverage to the day-to-day of your sellers that we can talk about too. So I think there's a little bit of something for everyone. So one thing I actually kind of like that when I was reviewing my notes ahead of our conversation, that kind of like made me do a double take. Like, so Fathom is the highest satisfaction product on G2. Is that like in the sales category or
Across everything. Yeah. So
that's
they actually put
insane?
our logo up in Times Square, like they kind of surprised us with that. Yeah.
What? How many products does G2 track? It's got to be like
About,
thousands,
yeah,
right?
it's tens of thousands of products. Yeah.
That's crazy. Okay, so like that's nuts. So congrats. And then,
Thank
but
you.
then I think the other thing that's kind of crazy about that too is that a lot of like people in our audience might say like, oh, well, like call recording, like that's been a thing for like a hot second. I'm very familiar with these different things. So like maybe you could share a little bit about like how a solution could enter a market like this and like serve what clearly must have been an unmet need. Right, if all of a sudden people are like adopting it like crazy pants and then also really being stoked out on it, that's like, I think that's a really interesting like entrepreneurial success story there. Also might be relevant to folks in the audience to kind of understand like, whoa, okay, like maybe this isn't your father's call recording, right? So maybe you can kind of share a little bit about that and why people
Yeah,
are
we
doing
saw
this.
kind of Yeah, I think we saw kind of three opportunities when we first started the
Uh-huh.
company. One was put this in the hands of people, not just in sales, right? So obviously, there's products like
Yes,
Calling Chorus
totally.
historically that did call recording. So and part of that was we thought we could, like I say, give away a really robust free version because the biggest
Yep.
input to this cost-wise was transcription, and now transcription costs are going down. So let's really democratize this, right, and make this something where
Yep.
every meeting in your org, especially every customer meeting, whether it's with customer success,
Yes.
client support, you name it, can be recorded. So that was one. The second one, though, is that just like AI, we just had this theory that AI is going to get a lot better. And
Yep.
that kind of like, the foundational part is all the infrastructure required to like reliably record these meetings. But now you can do
Yep.
so much more with those meetings because the AI progression is just so fast. And so I
Yep.
think, part of the reason why we get such accolades on things like G2 is we can now write better notes than anyone can, right? The AI can actually write better notes than the rep. And, we'll get you the notes within 30 seconds of the call ending. It's a pretty magical experience for folks that have never, had anything like this before. I think it's a lot of people's first real AI experience, right? Where it really kind of blows your mind.
Where it works. Yeah, where it actually works and
Right.
actually like does
Right.
something like
Yeah.
magical versus like, something silly,
Yep.
like a
And
magic trick.
so, no one in sales likes taking notes. No one likes filling in their CRM. No one likes doing all the, pre and post meeting data entry type stuff. And so the AI can do all that for you pretty well. And now, we're really excited to see, we're pushing into now what can we do for managers? But those are kind of like make it affordable, make it for everyone, and then really bring AI to bear on a lot of these like busy work type projects. And now we're seeing the frontiers moving towards, I think actually providing AI insights to managers across a bunch of meetings.
Yeah, and maybe not just to managers, but essentially it's like spanning. I think this is something that you see from an entrepreneurial design pattern all the time, where like when the cost of something declines substantially, right? Or like whether it's like the cost or the time cost or whatever, usually what ends up happening is you just get like a lot more of it happening, right?
Right.
And so that would be like, use Google searches as an example, or like, paying someone to drive you somewhere. Like, oh, you mean Uber? Like back 10 years ago, that you mean like a chauffeur? What? And like now, like, oh
Right.
yeah, Uber, right? Like, so you just have a lot more consumption. So all of a sudden, places where it maybe didn't make sense to do it previously, now it's like a no-brainer. Like, oh, your customer success team isn't recording all of their customer calls. Like, no, it's not, because like we didn't want to add like, pay $150 per CSM for Gong or whatever. So we didn't do that. It's just like, oh, so you're like not recording all those calls? Ew, right? Or like doing that with like your AMs or like, your product manager or your sales engineers or what have you. So like, I remember having this conversation. This was probably like a decade ago. I was at this bar in San Francisco, and I like ran into a product manager from ClearSlide, like this long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And like ClearSlide was like a very, very, very early kind of like combined selling workspace plus, and it actually had a call recording functionality in it,
Hmm.
insofar as like Twilio, just kind of like you can get call recording for free. But the funny thing was, at the time, you literally had to turn it on per call. And so I remember telling the product manager, I was like, hey man, like if you guys can ship a feature where we can just like flip that on, like I'd pay for that. Right. And he's like, oh, I don't know. People will be like really concerned about it. Da, 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 da. And so like our workaround for this is like a decade ago, right? And then also I think he was probably worried about costs or whatever. Our workaround for this was like we put a post-it note on every single one of my reps' monitors that just said turn call recording on. Like for every. Anyway, the point is that like so, but now there's no reason not to do that. And then I think the other thing too is to your point about like a new technology shows up that takes the existing transcription and like makes it potentially way more powerful. And like because I think the funny thing is that historically a lot of the times people have like thought that call recording was for coaching and for like call listening and so on and so forth. The reality is that most of the people who listen to the calls are the reps listening to their own call,
Right.
like ahead of
Yeah.
the next meeting to like get it back in their brain. Like I do this too. It's great, right? Like you listen to it at 2x, it's just like it's all the context back in there. The fiction that managers and like leaders are like listening to calls for coaching use cases is like just that. And so, but then I think there's a secondary piece of like, oh, okay, well, like now you can synthesize it, right? Like you can use large language model AI to like synthesize what's happening in that call. And then so instead of listening to it at 2x, which of course like might take 15 minutes for a 30-minute call or what have you, you can very quickly gloss that. And I think that's actually very transformative, and probably I think you had mentioned led to people kind of like adopting it on the side. Maybe you can kind of talk about, and like, which I think is really important as relates to you guys, because like anybody can install. You guys are like a
Right.
PLG motion, right? So like anyone can install this.
Yep.
Maybe you can kind of share a little bit about like how those use cases made it such that individual sellers could adopt this, permissionlessly, if you will.
Yeah, and I think that's something else we, before we started this company, I actually interviewed a bunch of Gong users and, mix of leaders and ICs and reps. And we kind of saw that like you said, some reps would go back and listen to their meetings, but a lot of them
Yeah.
wouldn't, right? And part of that was, it needed to be fast. You got to just, hey, we got to give you this output 30 seconds after the call ends. We need to make it
Totally.
easy for you to adopt it so you can just try it yourself. And and I think, post GPT-4 now, it's not just the recording, really. It's right. It's you get the summarized notes. And for us, we don't just give you the notes. We also give you each line in the notes is actually a link back to a part of the meeting. And I think that's super important because when I was running the sales team at User Voice is what I always ask. It's like I'd see someone's notes. I'd be like, yeah, what do they actually say here? Right. Like I think as a good leader, you're always
I need an anchor link to that
right.
point in the call.
I don't need to watch. I don't want to watch the whole call at 2x. I want to watch the right 45 seconds of that call. Right. Like, the pricing discussion, this objection they had. And I want to be able to jump directly to that. I think that's been the next step, right? Is making that, you're right, really accessible to find the moments that matter in those meetings.
Yeah, totally. And I think one of the things that, again, from a speed of adoptions, and I think this is like like an entrepreneurial insight here is, you can always be faster. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And like I actually ran into this last week on a call when someone, I forget what the context was, but like for whatever reason, I didn't let someone's note taker into the call. And so I actually had my we use Gong here. And it like, and the person was like, oh, well, can you remember to share that with me? And of course that means that I had to like wait an hour for it to transcribe. I literally had to put a like reminder on my calendar, like when this is done transcribing, grab the hyperlink and send it to this person via Slack. And as we know, like time kills all deals. Time introduces any sort of amount of like fall off. Right. And so
Right.
instantaneous transcription is obviously something that ends up being really important. And so I think for entrepreneurs who are looking to enter a market, if there's any sort of friction and they're in an existing workflow and there's new technology that shows up that allows you to attack that friction in a way that the legacy providers can't, that's like your area of opportunity. And then moreover, like if there's a new platform shift that shows up, so in you guys' case, like large language model AI was like kind of around like when the first like wave of call recorders showed up, but like not really, right?
No.
Versus like, hey, we know from the get-go that we're going to be able to like not only do instantaneous transcription, but also we're going to like, we know that pretty soon we're going to be able to do like really good synthesis on this, like this bag of tokens right here for this call. And then we also know that these LLMs are just going to get better and better and better and better, such that we can do synthesis across multiple bags of tokens, right?
Yep.
Which is like, what is a deal other than like just a bunch of calls, right?
Yep.
A bunch of conversations, right? And so I think that that's actually like an interesting thing there is like you guys we're kind of like skating to where the puck was going, but then also like the puck has gotten there like faster than you anticipated, and so like now
Yep.
you guys can do all sorts of like crazy stuff, like synthesis, like not just summarize this call, but like summarize like what's going on across everything. Maybe you kind of speak about that, because like that's pretty crazy, right?
Yeah, I think, last year GPT-4 is when you got to like really good notes on an individual meeting. And what we've seen in
Yeah.
2024 now is you can do really good synthesis across multiple meetings. So like we have a deal view where I can see all the meetings for this deal. I actually get a summary for the deal, not the meeting. I get a list of like all the key people in the deal and like what their roles are. And I get this kind of like a chat GPT kind of interface where I can ask any questions about it, right? Like, oh, are there any features or are there any blockers? Like and it'll kind of not just answer the question, but be like, and go watch, minute 5 of the third call in this, in this deal progression to see where they talk about this. And now where we're going with it is one step beyond that, which is, let's have an AI that listens to every call and scores the reps against whatever your methodology is, and let's be able to ask what we call it Ask Fathom. That's like our Chat GPT. Let's be able to have that across an entire account, across all the calls for certain sellers, that sort of thing. And our vision here is like not just give you insights, but like give you how do I give you as a sales leader, as a CS leader, as a product leader, whatever, the 5-minute highlight reel every day from all of your team's meetings, right? Because I think
That you, yeah.
Yeah, that you care about, right? I think that's how do we take, hundreds of hours of content and just give you, just the moments that matter, right? I think historically we found that's only like less than 5% of meeting is something that you as a leader need to hear about. It's a new competitor you haven't heard about. It's a new feature request you haven't heard about. It's a pricing discussion that didn't go well. Like those are the moments you want. And the AI can now basically truly be your co-pilot, listen to every meeting, and you can give it input. Here's the things I want to hear, but out of the box, it gives you kind of the things we think are generically applicable to your function.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing here is like what we're talking about, there's like transcribing of multiple conversations in a deal, right? And then doing synthesis across all of that, right? And that's like making a judgment about a deal, or like, and then if you think about like what is multiple deals is a pipeline for a rep, or multiple deals and like, multiple pipelines compose a sales team. Like it's just fractal all the way up, right?
Yep,
And
that's right.
and so then you're kind of saying like, okay, like what is the level appropriate synthesis? Like if you're a CRO, you might want to ask different questions like, hey, like where are the reps, like which teams are most wobbly, as an example,
Right.
And like you should be able to do synthesis like at the at the call level, or sorry, at the like you should be able to do like conversation based wobbliness, right, that rolls up across an entire team, because you've got 30 deals per rep times 5, times 5 reps or 6 reps or whatever, and like 4 calls per. That sounds like a lot, but it's actually, as far as like
Right.
a state of the
Yeah,
art like LLM is concerned, it's actually not awful. It would be very awful for us to make judgments about it, but for state of the art large language model, it's like not super awful. But I think there's another thing there too, which is, okay, cool, like the conversation is coming back, or like the conversation is being recorded, the rep is having back and forth, like understanding what's going on with the customer, positioning to them, kind of like moving them along from an understanding standpoint, and like an urgency standpoint, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right now the AI is kind of like listening to that, but you can imagine a scenario where like if the AI has like total information associated with that deal, or the multiple calls that have happened before, is there any particular reason why the AI can't actually respond back, right? And I think this is something that people are kind of thinking about as relates to like automation, not of the like input and synthesis, but also automation of the response, like the token generation, if you will.
Yep.
Maybe you can kind of like, obviously this has been happening in like AI SDR land, where there's lots of like lightly coherent emails being sent at very high scale, which maybe kind of speaks to like maybe some of the reticence and the concerns associated with like allowing something to like speak back to back to a customer. Maybe you can kind of talk a little bit about that and kind of like, could AI be speaking back to the customer, or is that something that is not, not tenable anytime soon?
Yeah, and I'll build on your last point too. I think you mentioned time kills all deals, and I think some of these things that AI can synthesize across like large data sets of lots of meetings also can do it in near real time. And I think that timeliness is important, like not waiting until we get to a pipeline review to know that there's something going wrong here, like being able to jump in. And almost, I think, especially in a world now where we're in this, like a lot of us are in hybrid or like we're remote only, right? Like we lost something by not having the deal floor where we can kind of, that's how we got our real time alerts before, was overhearing. Well, that's an interesting, I can hear one half of that conversation. That seems interesting. I should follow up with this rep right after it. But the AI can actually just flag it for me in almost real time. So I, as a sales leader, can jump in, or as a founder, I can jump in and kind of course correct before we get to my next pipeline review. But yeah, I think the getting to the point where the AI actually, generates content. Like, one of the top things people use Ask Fathom for is generate the follow-up email, or we're starting to see it also now be used for like generate the statement of work for this, or, write the spec for this or stuff like that. Right. So we're seeing it much more. I still think there's probably, I would say probably another 6 to 12 months away from you. I think right now everyone still will want to proofread that themselves, right? To a certain degree, right? And like fine tune it a little bit. But I think that maybe more is a comfort level thing than the AI is not there yet. I actually think the AI is probably there. It's just our ability to be comfortable with that generation, especially for things like email, which are low stakes sort of thing, right? You may not want to trust it to generate the quote just yet, but I don't think we're that far away from that either.
There's a little bit of Wi-Fi lag right now, Richard. I'm just going to pause until it figures itself out. Okay, cool. All right, we're going to start back up again. 3, 2, 1. Yeah, totally. And I think there's what we're talking about there is like lightly asynchronous. It's not like mega asynchronous, like wait a day or like wait an hour or what have you. I think the thing that a lot of folks are maybe thinking about is like when it's not asynchronous and instead it's like synchronous, which, I don't know if anyone's kind of goofed around with the ChatGPT voice mode or what have you. I was having a conversation with it this weekend while my son was doing soccer practice, and I was getting my steps in while refreshing my memory on all the different Mars, all the Mars rover missions, mainly just to kind of like familiarize myself with what is possible with real-time conversational like AI and like real-time, like the real-time voice models. But I think that, my hunch is that that's probably like in the next like 2 to 4 years, but probably not anytime soon. Even though like that offers a lot of potentially upside opportunity, because you see this like I don't know if anyone's like interfaced with like the intercom fins of the world from a support standpoint, or like the qualified like live chat, like LLM driven quote unquote SDRs. I think the reality is that like people are like pretty bad at typing, like customers are pretty bad at typing, and they're pretty bad at like translating their thoughts into words and then actually like going like this. But the ability to have like a real-time thing talking back and forth versus like some SDR on the other side or some support personnel who that has to be staffed is like pretty powerful. Doing that live verbal or like live like waveform is obviously like a lot harder. But you guys are definitely positioned for that, right?
I don't think it's as far away as we probably think it is, actually. Like, I've seen some demos recently of these fully AI synchronous AE replacement, even not just SDR. And the demos I generally see today are kind of stilted, right? They're like the avatars on Uncanny Valley. They're like, it's a little too laggy. The voice is a little too computery, but that's like the UX level. The hard part is like is it knowledgeable? Is it not hallucinating? And that part is, I think, largely solved or close to solved, right? Pretty good. I think the first generation of like the chat solutions, were pretty mediocre, right? They weren't like, they would often hallucinate, or they just, they didn't know, or if they didn't hallucinate, they were so like constrained that they give you an answer only on like 1 out of 5 things you asked. It was way worse experience, right?
Right.
So I think we're probably 1 to 2 years away from this. The question is really going to be one of like, I think it's going to be more of a social norm question, right? Like, do I feel comfortable talking to your rep? And I think the smart companies will probably make it an option, right? Hey, you could still book time with a human rep, or you can get instant access to an AI, right? And so I think you'll see this behavior where people will go, or into like, oh, I'll talk to the AI because we all want instant gratification, right? Instant answers.
Yep.
And then if I don't get what I need, then great, I'll book time. But now my time with the human rep will be much more concentrated, and you might have a focus more on having, we don't have reps, so we just have solution engineers. And it's like, great, I've already asked all my generalized questions of the AI, and now I have very specific implementation questions that I need to talk to an expert about.
Yeah, it's kind of like we talk a lot about like how, I mean, depending on if we're talking when we design, bow tie, or we're talking serious decisions funnel, but like we talk about how, when customers first engage a rep is like further and further and further down the funnel, like
Right.
the internet made it available such that like people could like consume content, right? Like Google made it so you could search, and then like, HubSpot and company made it such that like you could publish tons of landing pages in order to like get all that information. And I think what you're kind of talking about here is like, you can imagine having a conversational interface that like I ask questions to, and then I get like, words coming back to me to move my brain along, et cetera, et cetera. And then I get down to like the very, very bottom where it's like, very, very, very bespoke, or what have you. Maybe kind of like two like things that I wanted to make sure that we covered before we're out of time. Maybe you could tell us about your own sales team at Fathom, and like Fathom at Fathom, and like how the sales team works over there. Like, what do you think that they're doing well? Like, I would imagine, unless it's like a cobbler's children have no shoes sort of situation, I would imagine that's probably not the case. Like, I would imagine they're probably pretty badass at Fathom and like leveraging AI. Maybe you can kind of share some of the things that they do well, so other folks can kind of learn from that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting being a PLG company with a sales motion, right? Because we actually, a lot of times you don't see that, right? And so we actually started off 100% PLG on the core product, and then on our team product, it was 100% sales led. And so we actually have one of my other kind of big things is building out like an AI first ops team. I kind of think I talk a lot about like, I think the AI org of the future is like, how do you get to 100 million in revenue with 100 people type thing, right? Sam Altman talks about like, what's going to be the first company that's like a $1 billion company that's one person, which is even more extreme. So part of this is, having standard kind of RevOps tools, but also having a team that is staffed by folks that are kind of AI fluent, that are constantly working, partnering with different functional leaders, and saying like, how can we rebuild this process with AI, right? And so, we're obviously doing like the AI SDR thing. We're obviously using Fathom quite a bit for like, we don't do any post-meeting data entry. When we do our pipeline reviews, we basically are asking the AI questions like ahead of it, et cetera, et cetera. We aren't yet to the place where we're using AI agents to answer questions, right? We still actually like to have a lot of humans in the loop on that. But I think the most important thing is actually having an ops team that understands what AI can do and is constantly taking, okay, we want to change this workflow in the process in our product or our sales process. Do we even need this workflow anymore? Do we need to hire someone to do this data entry or to do this enrichment work or whatnot? Or can we go spin up an AI agent to do it? And I think that's a pretty transformational idea, to have like a centralized AI team that is working with everyone to figure that out.
Yeah, and I think honestly, like that's what operations has always been good at. And when I say it, I mean essentially like finding constraints and then applying technology to like unblock those constraints, and like whether whether the technology that's being applied is like, a like SQL database, right? Or whether the thing like the technology that's being applied is like, workflow rules or some sort of automation or what have you. And I think that like large language model AI is just a new tool in the tool belt, but like always like having a part like of the like loop of like, how can we fix
Yeah.
this? How can we fix this? That's like, instead of it immediately jumping to like, well, we could do a validation rule. We can add a field.
Right.
We could do a
Right.
flow, right? You're like, hey, could we do something with like large language, like, oh, like we have our group of offshore workers like on Upwork that we use for doing XYZ. Like always just kind of like running that through like the LLM loop really quickly in your brain, like, hey, what would the LLM version of this look like? Could we potentially do this? So one thing I wanted to make sure to kind of ask you, and I hope this isn't obnoxious, but like I think that everyone's pretty familiar with Gong, right? And either is using it right now or has used it at some point or what have you. Like Day and Chorus did a phenomenal job of like really just like broadly distributing the concept and like popularizing the concept of call record. Obviously they were like kind of early examples there, like Exec Vision and Clear, as I was mentioning earlier, like ClearSlide kind of had a version of this, et cetera, et cetera. But Gong like really just like distributed it pretty heavily. Like how have you managed to compete with them? Like are you at all, or is it like, are there organizations, it's like, hey, like those are large organizations, like new like organizations that like don't have call recording are adopting Fathom, or as we were kind of saying earlier, like maybe Gong is deployed in the sales organization, but like nobody wanted to pay for Gong licenses for the SDRs or the CSMs or the AMs. How does that work right now? Like are you guys competing with them at all, like, or not?
Yeah, I mean, one of our, if you ask our sales team, their favorite thing to hear on a call is like, I use or I've used Gong, right? Because it already, we don't have to, you're already over the hump of like, you understand the value of having call recordings. And then we can show you, okay, here's what we can do now with call recordings paired with really modern AI, which
Yeah.
is, I think, I think in some ways, Gong and stuff like that was really originally marketed on not just record the calls, but we're going to use AI to give you insights. And I don't think those insights, when we interviewed folks, weren't really as much used as just the call recordings themselves, right? Like, and now
Yeah,
because the AI just wasn't there 5 to 10 years ago, right? And now
totally.
the AI can just do so much more. And so we're like, great, we can do this. If you're familiar with Gong, we can do all that and more with modern AI at a price point that's so much cheaper that it's one, easy to get your CFO to buy in on, and two, easy to deploy this across the org, which I think just provides so much more benefits. Like, so we can have, especially from the executive suite, one consistent view of everything, every conversation that have happened with our customers, not just, basically before they close, right? And we've seen that be really powerful. Also, it helps, like we basically import people's Gong data for free and give them Fathom for free until the end of their Gong contract. So that also like make it a pretty compelling sale. But
That's a very
yeah,
generous it's a very generous buyout option there. Yeah, I mean, I think again for like the entrepreneurs that are talking with or that are here with us today, like we have kind of two audiences here. We have obviously this MSP, we've got the sales leaders and sales operations and what have you. And I think the sales operations, like there's a good takeaway here for sales operations where it's like, hey, how can you think about being AI first? There's some good takeaways here from sales leaders as well. But for the CEOs and the product and like the founders and what have you, who are listening to us right now, there's also a thing too, and this is why like VCs get like so excited anytime there's like a platform shift. It's because like when a new technology shows up, whether it's like, hey, now there's the cloud, and so like you don't have to deploy things on-prem anymore. What does that mean? Oh, well, we can deploy a database in the cloud and use it for CRM. That becomes Salesforce, right? Like it like creates these openings, and I think mainly because like these smaller organizations can be more nimble and adopt those things more quickly. And I think that's kind of what I'm hearing from you is like, one, there's a disruptive kind of like Clayton Christensen disruptive innovation going on here, which is like, yo, this is like so cheap that we can just deploy it across everyone. And then what we can also do is we can deploy LLM inference across use cases where it previously was too costly to do. And also you guys can just ship it faster because like you're a small nimble organization versus like an organization with like thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and then of course like thousands of customers as well, which like no shade. That's a champagne problem to have. It's just like anyone who's ever like, and I think sales leaders can appreciate this too. As you get larger and larger and larger, it just becomes so much harder to like ship product in a meaningful fashion because you have all these contingencies that are history. And so when there's new things that show up, like, oh boy, large language model AI, like long context window, large language model AI that's actually really smart. Great, we can ship call synthesis. Oh, actually, the context windows are getting longer and longer. We can now ship deal synthesis, right?
Yep.
And then you guys can just like ship that in a quarter versus like, oh yeah, that'll be great. Let's put that on the 2026 roadmap as an example.
Well, it was funny because I think when we got started, there were other companies kind of thinking about call recording, but a lot of other startups were kind of going out of their way not to compete with the Gongs and Chorus of the world because they're like, oh, it's like 800-pound gorilla. I don't want to take them on. And I thought that was a curious thing because it's like, wait, they've established this market is really big. And they're, I think as an entrepreneur, nothing juicier than seeing someone with really high price points and high margins, right? And, we looked at, this technological shift where, if you started this company in 2015, 2016, you have to build a lot of your own proprietary models for transcription, for AI. Oh, wait, all that stuff that is your IP is now actually a liability because it's actually nowhere near as good as what I can just get from OpenAI or Anthropic. And so that was, I think, the big shift is like, you're right. Like there's this, anytime you shift where someone's core IP is now basically made irrelevant, that's your opportunity. And then, I also just think PLG versus sales led, right, is a really powerful tool, right? When we can give away product for free, get bottom up adoption, right? And you get bottom up adoption into the ICs, it just makes the sales, it's such a game changer versus talk to my sales team, do a 6-week implementation process, right? Oh no, your sales team's already using it. Like flip the switch and you get more features, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So,
but I think the important thing for everyone to know, and if folks are interested in like thinking about like how you add sales on top of a PLG motion, I wrote an article. It's like fairly long for Lenny Rachitsky's newsletter back in like 2021, maybe, on layering on a sales team onto a PLG motion because I think it's actually a fairly important. How big did you say the Fathom sales team is right now, Richard?
About 10 folks.
Yeah, like PLG is great for for penetrating an organization, potentially getting, especially like if you have a non-complicated use case, but even like Zoom as an example, even during the pandemic, I think there's like an 80-20 law of like Gong's like revenue where like most of their revenue, like the preponderance of their revenues comes from like enterprise contracts, right? That like, no one's like swiping a credit card for that bad boy, right? Like you're talking to a human, et cetera. And so I think one of the things that I like to always say to folks is like, never mistake your lead gen for your business, right? It can be an initial kicker, like, and then potentially like you can get yourself a nice ARR base. Again, if your product is like smoking and like highly usable, if there's an existing use case for it, generally speaking, like new category deployment via PLG is like a little iffier. But like, don't get it twisted. Like someone's going to have to talk to real human beings before someone's going to write a check for $25,000, $50,000, $100,000, et cetera, at least probably in the coming few years. Like who knows, maybe in like 5 years or whatever that will change. But I think anyone in the next like 18 months or 24 months, usually when you have like founders or sales organizations who are just like kind of taking PLG orders, like, okay, let's like flip you on from like, $99 a month to $1,000 a year or what have you. That's, that's not the recipe for kind of like ARR scale versus layering a sales team on top of like PLG, installation, right?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of like, and I did this at User Voice, which was, we have I don't even like to use the word PLG product, we should have a free offering that just is lead gen that gets us in a bunch of organizations. And then you're right, we pair that with, that gives us a lot of data on who's doing well and might be interested in, advanced features and great. Like I said, we actually started off with, now we have some ways to upgrade self-service, But at the beginning, it was 100% you have to talk to our sales team. And that was one, because you're right, people have a bunch of questions they need answered before they'll buy. And also, like, the best way for us to learn, right? Like, when you put you in a self-service flow, I don't learn as much. And when I'm trying to build out this new
Sure.
product, it basically was sales and customer development at the same time.
I love it. Yeah. So to Richard's point there, like for homework for everyone who's watching us, if you want to learn about adding a sales team on top of a PLG motion, just Google Pete Kazanji, Lenny Rachitsky. I recognize that both of those names are probably not the easiest to spell in the world, but don't worry, Google will autocorrect them for you. And or like I think the name of the article is like, it's like the transition or something like that, but just like, you know, Pete Kazanji adding sales team PLG, blah 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 blah. And then there's another really great blog post by a guy named David Skok, who is a venture investor at Matrix. He runs he has a blog called For Entrepreneurs, and he just Googled JBoss, the story of JBoss, JBOSS. And it talks about how like JBot, the earliest examples of PLG was actually open source software where you could like just download the binaries, and then in order for them to like capture leads, they had to like give away the documentation behind a registration wall. These are good examples of that. So Richard, we're out of time. This is super fantastic. I think we had something for everyone. We had something for the sales leaders and the CROs in the world who maybe are like interested in adding more AI leverage to their conversation intelligence, their call recording, what have you, potentially thinking about that for their AMs, their CSMs, the other parts, the SDRs, like folks who may not have, you know, an expensive legacy call recording license. I think we had some good stuff for sales operations here as well, around like how to think about like AI leverage first in like refining and removing constraints from modern sales organizations. And I think we had some good stuff for entrepreneurs and founders and CEOs as well, kind of thinking about like from a product strategy standpoint, how to go up against, you know, big incumbents, where there are areas that like you can make their strength actually their weakness, and then leverage your own ability to get in there. So I think we covered some good things here. Thank you very much for the time. And then folks, I'm not sure which session is up next here, but I'm sure we have another awesome one coming up next here. Richard, thank you so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day. Feel better, okay?
Thank you.
Okay, take care.